Tariffs. They exist, and the US wants to use them heavily. Now you're probably wondering, what does that mean for you working in an e-commerce or crowdfunding context? Obviously, that is a complicated question, and it's easier to answer that when you're talking with someone else. So in this video, Chris Matthews, the partnership manager at Zatu Games, asks me a bunch of questions about tariffs. Zatu is a UK-based fulfillment company that works with Kickstarter campaigns, which means that Chris is no stranger to complex international shipping, and he knows just what to ask. We're going to cut to that interview in just a minute, but real quick, my name is Brandon. This video is brought to you by Fulfillrite. We ship orders for e-commerce and crowdfunding. Link down there below in the description for more details. Quotes are free. One last quick note, we edited this one, more than usual in fact, because the subject is complex and frankly, some details change between recording and releasing this video. But otherwise, as always, we want to keep this interview simple and a little bit lo-fi and honest, just like a couple of professionals on a Zoom call. Alright, let's cut to the interview.
The whole global situation is something that, I think it's on everyone's mind at the moment, and it's something that I wanted to know a little bit more about, so I'm really glad that we could do this today.
Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting here is we're flipping the script because anybody who's stumbled across the videos that we're doing at Fulfillrite knows that I usually ask other people questions, but this time you've got questions that you'll be asking me about US tariffs, and we'll give you the best information that we've got available.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think everyone has so many questions, so hopefully I probably won't even scratch the surface, but I have a few questions that we can run through, and hopefully you can provide a bit more insight from the other side of the Atlantic for me. So
yeah, definitely.
Is it all right if I just jump straight in with the first question? I guess it's kind of more of an overarching one. I really just want to understand what actually are tariffs, and why does the US impose them?
Okay, so first things first, I'm going to just put some basic, just kind of some basic information about how we're approaching this problem right now. It is April 24th today. I don't know when this is going up on YouTube, and stuff's changing fast. So in the answers I give you, I'm going to give you the most solid stuff we've got available, which means I might be vague around percentages and stuff like that, because that changes. But what doesn't change is just basic definition of tariff. And what that basically is, when you strip away all the news media, all the talking heads, all that stuff going on, it's a tax on imported goods. That is all it is. It's a tax on imported goods. And there's a couple of reasons that a government in the abstract might want to do that. You can do this to generate more revenue for the government without resorting to income taxes and other things like that. And the other big reason, and why it's become politically popular in the last decade or so, both on the right and on some parts of the left as well, is that it's one possible way to protect domestic industries. We hear this a lot with U.S. manufacturing because we import a ton of stuff from China. So there are just fewer manufacturing jobs in the U.S. to go around, which a lot of people had depended on for a long time. Now, you can use tariffs as kind of a way to negotiate and address trade imbalances, which is like imports relative to exports. Yeah, I'm gonna leave you with that definition there right now, and see if you have any follow-up questions based on that.
Yeah, I think a big thing for me, you talked about manufacturing in the US. Well, does that mean that there are only tariffs on products that you manufacture in the US, or is it tariffs on everything, or what products are affected, I guess?
So, right now, the recent round of tariffs, by which I'm talking about the reciprocal tariffs, which were first announced on April 2nd, it started out as a 10% baseline tariff on most products from all countries in the world. All of them. So basically all imports coming into the US. With some exceptions around very specific kind of products, the list of which changes on a pretty regular basis. Some countries were initially seeing higher percentages than others, but the initial figures that were put out there have been paused until July, possibly further, depending on what happens. The biggest one that a lot of people are talking about right now, in terms of what kind of products are affected, is Chinese imports, the vast majority of them, at a rate of currently 145%, which is to say, like, if something cost $20 US to import, it's going to cost about 50 going forward at that rate.
Jeez, that's a fair chunk on your yeah. So who pays for that then? Who pays? You say it costs $20 to import. Who then pays for the other $35 extra?
So there's kind of a cascading effect here. What happens first is that the people who are doing the importing pay extra in order just to receive the products into the US. Now, they might be finished products, or they might be raw materials used in another in manufacturing that's done in the US, like you import semiconductors from China and then you use them to make something else. Depending on the particular situation, though, either the products themselves or some of the supplies that go into making finished products are going to be more expensive if you're importing them from a country affected by tariffs, let's say China in this case. And when that happens, businesses are paying more for expenses, and that gets passed on ultimately to the consumer.
Okay, that makes sense. You talked a little bit about the rounds of tariffs and kind of how it's been in the US recently. What's changed in kind of the most recent one, if we're talking most up-to-date round of tariffs?
Let me actually pull up our ongoing tariff explainer, because like I've been trying to keep this up to date as the days go on, and it's kind of easier just to explain the chain of changes so that you kind of understand what we're looking at over here overseas. So it started out with a bunch of tariffs ranging from like 10% to percentages much higher, some of them even like 90 something percent for all the countries that you could list. We've got a full chart on our website, and I've got a link down there in the description for this. Now, those initial ones were paused. So what we're looking at now is like just a 10% universal tariff on all countries. But China in particular has been singled out with the 145% tariff rate, which I had mentioned.
Yeah, so China is not going to be at that 10% in the foreseeable. It's gone instantly to that 145% as of very recently.
Right, and as of April 24th, there is some kind of political scuttlebutt going around saying that there's like some kind of trade negotiation going on between the U.S. and the Chinese government, but it's difficult to say what that's going to look like. We could see that turn into like a 30% tariff. We could see it go away entirely. It could go up higher. It's hard to know, but right now at the time of recording, it's 145%. The other really, really big part of this is that we're looking at let me make sure I say this precisely here. Okay, so we're looking at the removal of the de minimis loophole. And what that means is basically anything under 800 US you could you could import from somewhere else, and you wouldn't have to pay customs on it. You wouldn't have to pay a tariff on it. This is why people could buy from Temu and get those really low prices and not have to pay extra tariffs on that. But that is going to be eliminated, as we currently understand it, early May. So when that happens, anything that's not in a U.S. warehouse going to a U.S. consumer, if it's bought straight from China and gets drop shipped or something like that from over there, the person who is buying that online is going to have the original cost of the product, and then on top of that, they're going to pay the tariff. And that will probably come in the form of like a separate bill from UPS or FedEx or another carrier like that.
Yeah, we have similar situation when we get stock shipped to the UK and it's not customs paid, customs duty friendly. So you then have a bill that comes through from the carrier that will ask you to pay it. So I guess on that note, we have in the UK we have kind of import VAT, which is a whole nother story. And then you've got duties as well, so customs duties. How do customs duties differ from tariffs?
They're really, really, really similar functionally. And in fact, I would wager that most people, when they're talking about them, even the people who are importing bulk goods, probably are not going to differentiate between the two once the dust on this settles. It's my understanding that tariff is more of just like it's put in place to protect industry or to raise revenue or even to penalize another country for something prioritized by the current government administration or something like that, whereas customs is just kind of normal tax that's out there. But again, like functionally, most people are not going to make a distinction between the two.
Interesting. Okay. You mentioned a little bit about de minimis or de minimis. So I'm not sure on the exact pronunciation either. Let's just say it's different in the UK and US on pronunciation.
I
I don't know.
think you guys have a de minimis of 15 British pounds, if I'm not mistaken.
We do, yeah. It's and it's slightly different if you're shipping from Europe to the UK as well. But that's yeah. So why? I've heard a lot about it recently, and we're aware of it shipping from the UK to the US for some of our partners. How come you mentioned about it? How come it's such a big deal now?
Okay, let's take a board game example because we both run in those spaces. So let's say I'm working with Panda and I need to get a sample sent to me and it's like $500 to do. I don't know if Panda charges that much for a sample, but let's just say it's 500. If it's 2023, I can just pay Panda and they could ship it from China to me, and 500 is 500. That's that. But if I'm a manufacturer and I'm trying to, or a publisher here, I'm trying to get something that's not a massive quantity of items just to see what it's like. I would all of a sudden I'd be paying that $500 charge plus 145% tariff because it's no longer falling under that, because that $800 threshold's not a thing anymore. So that's like 1240 or something like that. Doing a little like quick mental math, that's got to be close to it. And likewise, if I'm a consumer and I just like need to buy a webcam really quick, and I just go to Temu because I know it's cheaper. Instead of getting it shipped from China directly, and it's sent to me through they've got some super cheap shipping method that makes this possible. Instead of just having it sent to me and it's like 15 US dollars, without that de minimis loophole, it's like 50 or 60, and I'm just better off buying something that's in Walmart or in an Amazon warehouse or in one of these like kind of legacy retailers like Best Buy.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. It'd be interesting to see how retailers adapt, because obviously they're going to have to put up prices if their stock is coming from China, because they'll be buying webcams in bulk from China. But then I guess it's on the cost price, right, when they're buying it. So they'll be paying the tariffs on the cost price of the goods. So it'll be a lot lower than if you bought it sales price and then had to pay the tariff on the sales price.
That's right, because like a lot of people, a lot of large organizations, if they absolutely cannot afford manufacturing overseas, even with the 10% tariff, say, they're just going to want to import these at the manufacturing costs or even just wholesale costs into the U.S. instead of shipping it directly to consumers. So instead of ship from China to a U.S. consumer, they'll get a massive boatload of them, put them down in a warehouse somewhere, and then ship those out to the individual U.S. consumers.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Um, I guess on that, if I was looking at importing from China to the US currently, what kind of this could probably be a multi-part question, so apologies in advance. But what documentation do I need to look at? Where can I find out about tariffs and about the actual tariff rate on my product in particular? And yeah, what's kind of how can I ensure that I'm tariff ready? I guess is if we
Yeah,
put it like that.
yeah, definitely. I'm actually looking something up right now to answer that question because there have previously been all kinds of calculators online to help you calculate these things in advance. I'm trying to confirm right now that they are in fact still up to date. Because if they are, I can give you a very neat answer right now. Okay, yeah, no, definitely up to date. Okay, so I'm sorry, man. I just ran a quick calculation on what it costs to import some goods from China right now. So if you want to prepare for this, first things first, figure out what the actual cost is. Now, the most foolproof method is to work with a customs broker. And at this point, I would say just work with a customs broker. It used to be you could maybe do DIY a little bit on small projects. I would not even fool with that anymore because of the changing situation and the new rules. But if you want to forecast the cost of things, simplyduty.com. You can go there, you can type in where you're importing from and where you're importing to, what kind of good you're importing and its value, and it'll calculate the duty. So I put down what's it cost to import board games, product value $1,000 from China to the US, and it said $1,600 in taxes on top of the $1,000 value of the shipment.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to let that sit there. I mean, that's a pretty stark example.
Yeah, it's quite a shocking upfront cost, I guess. If you haven't pre-sold the goods and you're bringing them into the US.
Right.
On that note, is there anything that people can do to be, I guess, not preventative of the tariffs, but to there's no real loopholes because that's the reason the tariffs are there, right? But how can people best prepare for them? What's the best way of preparing for tariffs and shipping with tariffs in place?
So if we just assume everything's going to stay in place as it is, let's assume there are zero changes to the state of play today. Well, first things first, you probably want to look at places where the tariffs are lower. Now, like manufacturing costs vary from country to country, but there's a lot of things made in China that can be made in Vietnam, that can be made in other places like that, relatively inexpensive. Southeast Asia, I think there's a lot of stuff made in Central America as well, and it's less expensive because of the tariffs. And you need to basically take manufacturing costs plus the tariffs now that they're here, and the freight costs for that matter, add it up and see where the new cheapest is. Used to be you just default to say, we'll make it in China. Just question that assumption. That's the first thing. Second thing is definitely get a customs expert involved. Someone who can help you clear these through customs, because not only is there the fees and wanting to, minimize the amount that you pay, but also there's new compliance regulations. These agencies that were used to letting things go through that were under 800, now they have to charge taxes on all that, and that's a ton of work. So you want to make sure you've got somebody who knows how to work with these agencies now that they're very, very busy. That's the other thing. So consider cheaper places, bring in an expert, and probably the third thing is look at some domestic manufacturing for some parts if you are able to do that. And if you absolutely cannot avoid this is going to sound a little self-serving, but it is actually a fact. If you send a whole bunch of items to a US warehouse at the cost that at the manufacturing cost, it's a lot cheaper than having a warehouse in another part of the world and then shipping it to individual backers or individual consumers. So the math is starting to change on that as well.
Yeah, especially if you're thinking about drop shipping from China, it just cuts out any kind of profit.
I honestly don't know what drop shippers are going to do. I would say like sending goods drop shipped from like Alibaba or something like that is probably no longer a viable business model at this point.
Doesn't seem that way. I mean, you can start trying to look at diversifying your markets, but the US is just such a big market,
right?
That you can't take that hit and pummel it, kind of spread it elsewhere.
So well, that's what makes it so darn tricky, right?
Yeah,
it's 330 million people or something like that, all relatively well off. I mean, on average, at least. And you can't. It's hard to just bypass the U.S. altogether.
You can't. You just can't. And I think that's where it's really. It's going to be a really interesting period of history to see what plays out over the next 2, 3, 4 months, and this administration. The interesting thing that I've read about is that especially from the UK to the US. They've been talking about getting rid of the de minimis for a long time, even kind of during the Biden administration. So this isn't kind of completely new and shocking from what I understand. And having spoken with kind of our account managers, our international account managers for the courier partners that we work with, it seems as if they were almost expecting it. What they're not certain about, and I imagine it's probably the same in the US right now, is this is going to have a huge impact on the postal service. You mentioned, oh, well, if you get a parcel in from China or the US, it sounds like you're going to have, or UK even, it sounds like you're going to have to pay a tariff to the courier company, who'll then pay it to the government. Well, if you think how many parcels are shipped through JFK every day, and how many parcels that just sail straight through at the moment, suddenly all those parcels are getting stopped. And all those parcels are waiting at a holding facility and saying, okay, right, before we send these out, before we ship these to the final consumer, all these charges need to be paid. Well, you're talking a warehouse. I mean, it's going to be half the size of New York, just fill up with all these parcels. And then if people don't pay them, do they send them back? Do they destroy them? What's going to happen?
Well, that's the big open question, right? So UPS and FedEx have got, at a minimum, pretty decent systems in place for collecting customs. They know how to do that. They've never had to do it on this scale, but the private companies have a decent system for it. DHL, interestingly enough, one of the better prepared carriers as well, has just... Let me make sure I've got this correct here as well. They paused something. Okay, they paused the delivery of business-to-consumer goods to the U.S. valued at more than 800. They just totally paused it because they don't know how to handle anything that goes over the present de minimis, which will probably be the previous de minimis at the time that this publishes. They don't know what to do with it. And then there's the U.S. Postal Service. Now, I had read something somewhere about how they don't frequently collect customs and they don't have the resources to do that. And if that's the case, there may be a situation, at least for the next several months, where it's just not a viable carrier for sending items internationally into the U.S. like it has been previously. I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't want to get too out over my skis here. But the point is, we don't have all the infrastructure in place for this yet. It was already kind of spread thin to start.
Yeah. When we send goods currently to the US and we have to send them direct to consumer for various parts of the business, at the moment, Royal Mail will pass it to USPS. So it arrives and it goes to the United States Postal Service and they deliver it. Well, if suddenly they're not able to do that, then the viable carrier at our end doesn't become the viable carrier in the US, or they're delayed by 2-3 weeks whilst they try and figure out a customs solution. It's going to cause carnage. We're just surmising here, and that's what can happen. And maybe when this video comes out, it'll all be sorted and it'll be a plain memory of the past. But something tells me in this current world state that won't be the case.
Right. And there's so many narrative threads to this that are complex and they get buried because of the political polarization. But to your point, this is not necessarily just this is not just a thing that has happened because of this administration. There have been other folks well to the left of center who have wanted to do some protectionist things as well along the lines of tariffs. So it's not necessarily an entirely Republican initiative. The implementation is something that has definitely come from this administration, the things that they prioritize, but the actual underlying idea is not necessarily and not entirely. Another interesting narrative thread here as well is that there's a split within the governing party, which only has a fairly thin majority, So like not even all Republicans in the Senate, in the House, in the key agencies, the cabinet secretaries, all those folks, they don't all agree on how this ought to be done as well. So there is a possibility that a lot of this stuff gets walked back because of just the general laws of politics. And that a lot of that's going to come down to who gets in a room with who and talks to who at what time of day, and then whatever little me reads in the New York Times or Axios or wherever, or the Wall Street Journal, and tries to compile into a blog. But point is, there's political factions. Some of this stuff is in flux.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's scary that such a monumental impact can come down to essentially who's in a room with who at the right time. When we're talking about, I mean, we've already seen in, like you said, both in the board game space of logistics, we've already seen the collapse of multiple gaming companies in the board game space because this has been the final kind of nail in the coffin. And it's really pushed people.
There's been a number of pressures to begin with, but this is one that's going to be particularly difficult because there's like 3 to 5 really large manufacturers in the U.S. for board games, in particular, I think it is, and then there's even limits on what they're able to provide as well. There's like certain parts that they still have to source and that kind of thing, so it's going to be very, very difficult to manufacture games for the same price. So there's probably a couple of things that could happen. One, going real heavy into card games, because that's going to be a lot more viable. That's one possibility. And another is just like a lot of the other stuff goes much higher price because of the material costs as well. We'll probably see a little bit of both, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. What I'm interested to understand finally, I think, is a little bit of your opinions. I mean, obviously, this is all just speculation at the moment on how this is going to affect trade into Canada and kind of and Central and Southern America, because I imagine, especially in the fulfillment world, we ship a lot into Europe. We're neighbors with Europe. It's quite easy for us to do, and I imagine it's fairly similar with yourselves and Canada and Central and Southern America. Maybe not as easy into Southern America, but definitely Canada. Do you think this is going to have a huge impact on that partnership and kind of that route? Because I know the Canadians have put on kind of that they did say about putting on tariffs back the other way.
This is where it gets complicated again, because it's like we've had free trade agreements since the 90s with Canada and Mexico for a lot of things, and there are now tariffs in place, so things are not goods are not flowing across the border in the same patterns that they used to. Now, I don't know what they're going to do in Central America. I don't know what they're doing in Mexico, but Canada's weirdly been in the news a lot, which never happens. Honestly, Canada's pretty quiet. They're a very quiet upstairs neighbor here. But Canada's been in the news because, of course, they've got an election coming up in a week. And by the time, folks see this, they'll know whether, Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre's going to be in charge going forward. But even with that, it's like both of those parties, from what has bubbled over to me, they want to kind of make their economy a little less attached to the U.S. as well, kind of like build up some resiliency there. And I have to imagine they're probably going to have more warehousing operations on their side, and they're going to want to store things in their own country, so it's going to change the flow of goods there.
Sure. Because I know currently there's a lot of, especially US-based publishers, who will ship into the US and then ship stock to Canada. Well, if you're getting a hit with 145% tariff and then shipping that stock onto Canada and it gets hit again with a tariff, I don't know if that would be the case.
And they don't have 145 between U.S. and Canada, but it's either the baseline 10 or there's like 25. I cannot remember which one it is at this point because, again, there's been rapid changes. But either way, all of a sudden, maybe it doesn't necessarily make sense for a U.S. warehouse to be shipping to Toronto. Maybe you want to get somebody who's like in a relatively cheap part of Ontario or something and you start shipping there. And instead of shipping from California or like Northern California, Oregon, Washington State, all of a sudden, like to Vancouver, all of a sudden you just like get your own warehouse in British Columbia and you start doing that as well. We're probably going to see some stuff like that happen for the folks who can afford to have the steady order volume to do that.
Yeah, that's a really little tricky part, because setting up multiple warehouses is fantastic for a logistics operation, and it streamlines your customer experience, and it's yeah, a real asset to your business. But it does come at a cost, as does everything within the logistics world. I mean, you start at the very base of kind of doing your own orders, but then you get to a point where actually I want to spend my time running the business and kind of going that. But this feels like a point where it's going to really be make or break, for smaller companies that perhaps are looking, well, I'd like to have another warehouse, but that comes with a load of costs and setting up costs and things like that. So it's going to be a really interesting time, and yeah, I know you'll keep me up to date, Brandon. So
I'll do my best. I will say this, like, obviously there's going to be some very difficult changes for a lot of people. Now, in the long view, 5, 10, 15 years, people are smart, collectively and individually. I really do believe this. And like, we, meaning Americans who are caught in this and everybody else across the world who's caught in this, are going to figure things out. We're going to figure out free trade agreements with this or that region. You know, probably the EU is going to start working together more tightly. Probably the UK is going to work with the EU more tightly. It's going to be a lot of stuff like that, as well as people starting to source things from their own countries. And maybe this will even have the bonus effect of cutting down on carbon emissions. I don't know. But like, one way or another, people are going to figure out a way to pivot. And it's just a matter of how much is it going to suck to get from here to there. That's the thing.
yeah. I think you've answered all my questions.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've done my very best.
sorry,
Of course, this stuff is all in flux.
I've kept firing them at you, Brandon.
No,
but
it's good.
yeah, no, I really, like I said before, I really appreciate your time to go through this. I know there's lots of information out there, so I think it's worth just like you said, there's forums and blogs and the website you mentioned about checking the tariff. What was it?
Simplyduty.com is a good online calculator for that. And I've got an ongoing blog that keeps this stuff up to date as well, which I'm putting down in the description. And you know what? For that matter, there's a couple of other websites which we're using to keep on top of these updates as well. I'm going to go ahead and include those as resources as well, so that when 30% of what I said goes out of date, you will at least be able to find the accurate information somewhere.
I'll keep my eyes peeled, and ear to the ground, like I say. Try and keep up to date.
Yeah,
So yeah, I really appreciate your time. And
absolutely.
oh, it's great. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this interview. I appreciate it, and I know that Chris does too. Details on both of our companies are down there in the description, and just in case you missed the name, my name is Brandon. I am here on behalf of Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping your orders, go to fulfillrite.com and request a quote. We have shipped for thousands of crowdfunding companies and e-commerce companies before, and we are happy to help you too. The quote won't cost you a thing, so if nothing else, you get some good information on pricing. Link in the description. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and don't forget to slap some postage on that bell so that we can express ship new videos to you as soon as they drop. And last but not least, if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. I will personally answer as many of them as I can. Thanks for watching.